This is Matt Sears, Director for Professional Learning.
And Isaac Lake, Director of School Services.
Okay, so welcome to this webinar. We have two objectives today. The first is to provide you an overview of how to access our new technology platform, Canvas, which is a learning management system. And I know that many of you are familiar with Canvas. There are a lot of districts and schools using it. But we do want to ensure that you as principals or as people participating in the school planning process can get into our system, find where the resources are, and engage with your school support teams in the planning process. The second objective is to actually walk you through the planning process. Isaac will be talking about some of the templates we have for this year, any changes from last year, and where you can find these items as well as some timelines.
And what I would say there is that the planning process itself has not changed except for the shift from one platform to another. But there will be folks with us who will be doing the planning process for the first time, and so we want to make sure that we touch on each step of the process along the way. Thank you, Ben.
Yep. And it's worth saying that the purpose for this, as we just outlined, was twofold, but it's also a change from LiveBinder, which we have used for the last 2 school years. We are moving away from LiveBinder and into Canvas as the housing place for the planning process documents. All of your information from your LiveBinder has been moved into Canvas. We do not plan to delete the LiveBinder accounts for some time. So as you transition, you can still access them there, but all of those resources have been morphed and moved over into Canvas, and that's what we'll see today. And we'll do a few pauses throughout just to allow folks to type into the chat box if there are questions. We will not go at a pace where you can sort of play along at home and try to go through the processes that we click. We think that would turn into a 2-hour webinar, and we want to keep this under 45 minutes. So we apologize that we don't have that kind of time, but we will go slowly so that you can add comments and questions to the chat box. We can get those answered, and we know some of you are taking notes, so we'll try to be patient with our pace. And please feel free to say slow down at any point.
And ask any question that you have along the way, please.
Perfect. All right. So the jump-off point for today is actually going to be the new school's website. Give me a moment while I pull that up. And for those that were familiar with the Commons, which we disabled a few months ago, the login for Canvas is in the same location as where the login for the Commons was. It's in the upper right of the NC New Schools website. So for a mental map of how to get to what is replacing LiveBinder, what is replacing the Commons, is Canvas. You can always come to the NC New Schools Breakthrough Learning website and click Canvas. Now, we know that several of you have already, through other communications, specifically replacing the discussion boards from the Commons, have already logged in. But for those that are here for the first time, the Canvas login and password are not managed by our staff. In a pinch, I can handle your password, but the way to establish your password for the first time is not to come in and try things, but rather to click the Forgot Password, enter the school email address that we have on file, request your password. You will get an email with a link, just like many systems have, to reset your password, where they'll ask you to put it in twice, and then you can come back to the login screen and you'll be able to access our system. Could be a moment while I log in. Okay, so we'll do a quick overview of the dashboard, which is the landing page. The dashboard works in 2 different ways. Initially, you all will very likely see 3 different tiles. We call them courses, and we'll talk more about what that is in a few minutes. We have 2 discussion boards for principals. We have discussions for everyone where all NC New Schools Breakthrough Learning clients can participate in discussions, and then discussions for principals, where only principals of schools have access to share thoughts, ask questions of one another. The third tile you should see is a school support team file for your school. And we thank Heather Benfield in her absence for allowing us to use her school support team Canvas course as the example. You can also get to your courses using this button on the left, where it will have your courses listed. And some of you may get to a point as we roll out Canvas for professional learning support, where you have so many courses that clicking all courses will allow you to see your full menu. Calendar and inbox are fairly intuitive, and we won't go into those today. We're going to spend all of our time today in the school support team course for your school, but using Challenger Early College as the example.
But we should note there that there are differences in the SST courses for early colleges and for comprehensive schools. So some of the data collection, for example, is differentiated because of the difference in models.
Correct. So the landing page for your school support team is a high-level overview of what was in your live binder. There were 4 main categories in the live binder, and they've all been replicated here. There was the planning process, professional learning, the recognition of innovation and excellence link, and the new schools website was the former landing page. What you'll also notice when you access your school support team in Canvas is that your school support team members should be listed below, along with their contact information, and these are hot linked to their email addresses. At a high level, each of these 4 buttons, as we call them, links to the individual content. The website is fairly obvious. Recognition of innovation and excellence simply links out to the secondary support website we have for RIE. Professional learning is the same tab as what was in LiveBinder, and when we click professional learning, it simply takes us to a link for how to register for events. And that in LiveBinder was actually the embedded registration web page. So we have not embedded it here, but we have provided your password so that remembering that is not a challenge. But let's just click the registration link. We had an email today asking where do we find Summer Institute registration, and it takes you to the registration page that we hope you are all very familiar with. Further down, we have built in an area for archive so that as things are added, things are changed over the years, we plan to move them down into the archive and keep the top section current. And you should see that consistently across our use of Canvas. I'm going to jump back to the home page and then pause for just a moment to see if there are any questions so far. Please feel free to ask questions as to what we've discussed so far. And before moving to the planning process button, which is where we'll spend the rest of this webinar, there is some text at the top of your school support team that may be different from what's visible here. And I would just note in that text that's on your screen that we are piloting design principle rubric changes with a subset of our client schools this school year. That is a smaller subset than the majority, so most of you will not see the pilot. You'll be using the rubrics that we've used the last several years. But in case you are playing along at home or when you jump into Canvas soon, many of you will not see pilot listed here, and what comes in the subsequent page will be slightly different as well. Okay, without any questions, we'll jump into the planning process section of your Canvas School Support Team course. I'm going to do a quick overview of the entire page, and then we'll sort of move through piece by piece. When you come into the planning process for your school, we have created this year's planning process at the very top of the page. These are new templates. These are links that you will use for this year's planning process that kicks off now, and for many of you, kicked off with conversations at your school support team meetings in the last several weeks to couple of months. So the part above the colored bar here is the planning process between now and Summer Institute. Further down, we have tried to build out that archive of information that was in your LiveBinder. So for Heather Benfield, principal of Challenger Early College, her impact plan for this year is actually listed here in the archive, even though we're still working with it, as well as last year's data, self-assessment rubrics, and additional documents. Further down, we have the information from the year prior. And that should be consistent across all of your school support team Canvas courses. For this year's planning process, and Isaac is going to take us through in a little more detail, I did want to remind you that Challenger, the one we're using as an example here, is using the pilot rubrics. And so when we get to phase 2, we'll discuss the slight differences between what we see here and what is likely in your Canvas school support team course.
Yes.
So we begin with the planning process overview website, which is a support website for the entire planning process. And I'll click here and I'll have Isaac walk us through what we see.
Okay, so we have 4 tabs here: the planning guide, the planning process timeline, support videos, and frequently asked questions. These are documents that describe the entire planning process, each phase. So the planning guide, for example, will mention each phase of the process. It begins with an overview. This document was in LiveBinder last year. It has been updated for this year, but again, the process has not changed. We still have these 4 phases. Phase 1 is the collection of data. You had data templates in your LiveBinder last year. Those data templates have been archived, and new ones have been created for you that are in Canvas now. But the process of data collection and analysis itself has not changed. We simply would invite you to do it in this platform. Likewise, the self-assessment, phase 2, has also not changed. We provide some questions and areas of reflection that Matt is scrolling to. These are intended for you to use as you work with your staff. Remember, a key part of the planning process is to make sure you have a collaborative self-assessment process where at least all of your staff and perhaps hopefully some of your students and other stakeholders can have input as you review the design principle rubrics and try to assess where you are. And so these questions are not things you have to type up and submit to us. These questions are for you to use as you work in sessions with your staff. And so they are aligned to each design principle and aligned to the design principles rubric. Again, do not submit answers to these questions. They are there to help you as you have those crucial conversations with your staff. Phase 3, likewise, has not changed. Now, if we went back 3 years, there was a time when we actually asked schools to submit artifacts identified in phase 3. But let me be very clear, we are not asking schools to submit these artifacts. Let's look at the first bullet. For the design principle indicator your school assessed highest on the rubric, That is, wherever, if you place yourself in new paradigms or closest to it, whatever you rate yourself highest at, we ask you to identify a representative artifact from your school that demonstrates this level of implementation. You do not need to submit that artifact to us, but we ask you to identify it and use it internally with your staff to make sure that you are finding evidence that demonstrates that where you place yourself on the rubric is where you actually are. Likewise, we say for the design, this is the second bullet for the design principle or indicator you identified as most important for high leverage growth. Please plan to address this in one or more of your impact plan goals. You do not need to submit anything in phase 3, but whatever you identified as the most important thing for high leverage growth in the coming year, we would anticipate that when we get to the impact plan, you will have a goal and some strategies written around that. And then we ask you to reflect the third bullet here. For whatever indicator or design principle there was the most discrepancy or challenging conversations among your staff, we ask you to reflect on how you worked towards consensus to agree where to place yourself on this indicator or on this design principle. Now, some schools just put the stuff up there and ask people to come with sticky notes and kind of vote that way or sort of do it numerically. We would encourage and invite really having those conversations, sometimes challenging conversations, but we think it really builds school culture to have a transparent and honest conversation about where you are for each design principle. And so we just ask you to reflect about how you reached consensus on whichever one was most challenging for you to agree on. Do not need to submit anything for phase 3. Phase 4 is impact planning itself. And this is where we ask you to identify 2 or 3 high leverage goals for the coming year. These are the things that are most important for you to work on that we can lend our support to for the coming year to move your school forward to improve outcomes for all of your students. And so we hope, as in years past, that you will come to Summer Institute with 2 or 3 high leverage goals in mind that you have arrived at through the process of data collection, data analysis, self-assessment, and reflection. And this will, I know for the schools I work with, and I believe for each of us, these will be topics of the third school support team meetings. We want to use those meetings to support you in this process. But again, the hope is that everybody will come to Summer Institute at least having identified 2 or 3 high leverage goals for the coming year. Then if you can identify, if you'll scroll down, Matt, if you can, and you would write those goals just as you did before. Then if you can identify some strategies and outcomes, resources, et cetera, then go ahead and fill those in. If not by Summer Institute, we will use team time at Summer Institute to fill in those boxes. Either way, Summer Institute will, as it has been in the past, a time for you to attend sessions that we hope will align to the goals you've established for the coming year, and then share your plans and perhaps get some feedback from other teams. And we hope that you can use team time at Summer Institute to refine your impact plan so that by the time we ask you to submit the impact plan July 15, you are ready to do that. And the submission of the impact plan is merely to get it into Canvas. You don't have to send it to us otherwise. We simply mean filling out this part of your SST course in Canvas. That is the submission of your impact plan.
So to close out what else is in the school planning process website, there's also a planning process timeline, which mirrors what Isaac has walked us through. Finally, we have some support videos where 4 of our principals walk us through how they walk their staffs through the planning process.
And these are principals from a variety of models. So I believe 2 of them are from early colleges, and 2 of these principals work in comprehensive schools.
There are a few FAQs on the final tab. And we'll pause just for a minute if there's any questions on the school planning process support sites before we jump back into Canvas. Jumping back over into Canvas, what you'll see in your school support team planning process site is a mirror of that planning process guide. We have the 4 phases delineated here, and they are linked to the information that NC New Schools Breakthrough Learning both needs to have from partner schools so that we can analyze how our schools are doing and provide you supports around that data. And we have a template based on your school model that is the first link below data. So for early colleges, this is an early college template. The contact information is at the top, and then this document has not changed other than to be updated from last year, where there are a variety of questions about how your cohorts are doing, what college success looks like at your school. And you should note that as you complete the document, the colors change from yellow meaning unanswered to green meaning complete. And Isaac, is there a timeline on school data submission? Obviously, it's step 1 of the process.
There is not a timeline on school data submission, but we do think of it as a key first step in the process.
The second, for high schools, is that we have asked in the past, and we do ask you to upload your National Clearinghouse data. So let's click this link. It will take us to a secondary site where there's information on how to collect and submit your National Student Clearinghouse data. The information is fairly simple. Student names, birth date, cohort year, and year of graduation. We have a link to a template, and then to upload, you simply put your school, your email address, and upload that file. What the National Student Clearinghouse data gives us and gives you in return is information about post-secondary success for your students. Rich value information about matriculation and success.
And this information is very important and useful for us, and I know many of you are very interested in this information as well.
Phase 2 is self-assessment. For the majority of our schools, yours will be slightly different, and I will show you what that looks like in just a moment. But for all schools, there are blank rubric links, and it's very easy to click the blank rubrics, print them out, bring them to staff meetings as you engage in this process. We have a link to the blank rubrics. For the majority of schools, you also have a link to provide the summary self-assessment at some point during the planning process. So once your school comes to consensus through a rich and engaging process with all stakeholders, it is not hot linked there, but it will be hot linked in your own Canvas course. It will take you to a clickable rubric that probably looks familiar to many of you, where you enter your school, staff, and email, and then for each indicator, you simply click where your staff and stakeholders feel your school falls. You do that for each row, for each design principle. First is Ready for College, second is Powerful Teaching and Learning. You review the overall summary. You can see that we've already clicked some here. And then finally, at the bottom, again, we ask you to confirm your information, click Final, and Submit Form. If you have done that in the past, just to jump back to Canvas, That information is archived here. You can see last year's self-assessment rubric. You can see the self-assessment rubric from the year before. But just like collecting and inputting your data, we think it's valuable to have a record of where you're self-assessing over time. So please do complete that at some point, either prior to Summer Institute or right after Summer Institute when you finalize your impact plans.
Yeah, we really think, we strongly encourage everyone to complete a thorough and rigorous self-assessment before establishing your high leverage goals for the coming year. We feel like the assessment is the necessary due diligence before setting goals for the coming year. And I would also note or reiterate, 30 schools in our network have been identified and have agreed to pilot the revised design principles rubric, but only 30 schools. And we wanted that to be representative to some early colleges, some comprehensive, and some other schools. That means most of you will have the same design principle rubric that you have used in the past. And just as in the past, you will be provided this clickable rubric that you can use to click on, just as Matt is demonstrating, just as you have in the past. So no change there, unless you're a school piloting the revised rubrics. If you're a school piloting the revised rubrics, we don't have a clickable rubric for you, so you have it in PDF form merely. But we've had rich and broad feedback over the last few years. We know that the design principles are ripe for revision to make sure that they work for all schools in our network, and that's the purpose for the revision. It's very good for everybody to be aware of that. And the feedback that we're going to get from the pilots will help us further refine that instrument, and it is our hope and plan that this time next year, every school that we work with will use the new design principle rubrics, which I should say keep entirely the spirit of the design principles and the rigor of the design principles, but we are broadening the language to make sure that it works for every school in our network.
Phase 3, reflection analysis, refers you back to the planning guide that Isaac walked us through. Again, we do not have any submissions, so while we have a link to the planning process overview website again, and we ask you to see page 4, there is no submission of your reflection analysis. And finally, you have a new clean template for your 2016-17 impact plan that is personalized for your school. The template looks a little different than last year.
Right. For one thing, the old template had boxes and columns for 4 school support team meetings. And in almost every case, we are going with 3 school support team meetings per year. And so where they used to be all of that plus an end-of-year reflection, you'll see that this is a little bit simplified so that we have for each goal a progress checkpoint, which would be the first school support team meeting, another progress checkpoint for the second or mid-year meeting, and in each case, opportunities to make revisions to the school plan. And then you see in the pink over there on the right, the school support team progress checkpoint 3, which also accomplishes the end-of-year reflection. So we think like that, we hope that we've cut out redundancies and anything extraneous and left here everything that we need. Might pause for any questions at this point.
While we're waiting on questions, I might add that although we're pretty familiar with these templates at this point, especially if you're a returning principal, goals 2 and 3 have tabs at the bottom in Google Sheets.
But change goal 2.
We might want to change that. Okay. So that concludes the explanation of the planning process page within your school support team Canvas course, and really concludes both objectives of this webinar. We will stay on for the next several minutes with any specific questions, but we know that school support team meetings are coming up, the final school support team meeting of the year. We would invite principals to attempt to enter Canvas, to familiarize yourselves with what's been presented today, so that those conversations are ready for the school support team meeting, and any questions can be answered at that school support team meeting.
At the same time, since we have been using LiveBinder all year, many of you may prefer to use LiveBinder and use the impact plan in LiveBinder to review the year for to review the work of this year during that third school support team meeting, and then look ahead to the transition to Canvas in time for bringing an impact plan to Summer Institute. Most importantly, we hope that the third school support team meetings will allow the whole school support team to make sense of the work this year around the impact plan goals, and to make sure that we are supporting you to ensure that your self-assessment this spring and your impact planning between now and Summer Institute is successful and effective.
Having served as an EIS last year, I can say if you're looking for a jump-off point, those 4 videos on the support side are a great place to start to hear from your colleagues, your peers, about how they begin their process.
The schools that spend time really getting all staff familiar with the indicators themselves and the design principle rubrics, and really go through a collaborative process to arrive at your assessment, in my experience, set the richest goals for the coming year, and that allows our support to be truly differentiated to help you all move forward.
And we had an excellent question from Patsy. Yes, this webinar is recorded, and we will be processing it this afternoon, and it will be ready for viewing. You should hear from your EIS in the next day or two with a link to review this webinar. Bonnie, we appreciate the compliment, and we aim to please. We hope that everyone will find the transition from LiveBinder to Canvas to be easy and hiccup-free, but the hiccups can be inevitable, and we are here to support you. With that, we will end the webinar. Isaac and I will stay for another 5 to 10 minutes until we see everyone has dropped out. If you have questions, we're happy to answer them. You can use the chat box or unmute yourself, and we can simply be here for conversation. Thanks so much for attending.
Many thanks to each of you for taking this time.